You found the skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey there, YouTube, the Dapper Dinosaur here. I've been doing this whole counter-creationism thing for a long while, but there's one famous idiot I haven't talked about yet. His name is Ray Cometh. Now, that's not to say I've never mentioned him, but I've never actually dedicated a whole video to him. You might remember him from such hits as The Crocoduck.
All right, and if you find one of these, you could become rich and famous. So here's some transitional forms. This is called the Crocoduck. Can you see this?
God, what a numbnut.
As well as the origin of the title of this video.
Hold this, Kurt. Behold the atheist's nightmare. Now, if you study a well-made banana, you'll find on the far side there are 3 ridges. On the close side, 2 ridges. If you get your hand ready to grip a banana, you'll find on the far side there are 3 grooves, on the close side 2 grooves. The banana and the hand are perfectly made one for the other. You'll find the maker of the banana, Almighty God, has made it with a non-slip surface. It has outward indicators of inward contents. Green, too early; yellow, just right; black, too late. Now, if you go to the top of the banana, you'll find, as with the soda can makers, they placed a tab at the top. So God has placed a tab at the top. When you pull the tab, the contents don't squirt in your face. You'll find the wrapper, which is biodegradable, has perforations. Notice how gracefully it sits over the human hand. Notice it has a point at the top for ease of entry. It's just the right shape for the human mouth. It's chewy, easy to digest, and it's even curved toward the face to make the whole process so much easier.
Well, I may not have focused on him yet, but I'm going to now. This video is called The Number One Reason Evolution is Impossible. Now, as is typical for Ray, there's going to be a lot of preaching. If you feel like you need Jesus to wash away your sins, lest you go to hell, then cool, go be a Christian. If you don't, then that's also cool. I don't care. And I'll be cutting out anything that isn't making a claim about science, including his bits where he allegedly brings various students to Christ in a way that I can guarantee the Christians of the first few centuries CE wouldn't recognize in the least. Also, I want to say that this is one of his videos where he goes around and asks random college-age kids about science topics that are almost certainly not a focus of their studies. Obviously, they don't really know much about the topic, which is perfectly fair, but then Ray uses this to imply that evolution is nonsense. Lastly, this whole video had a lot of music throughout, and in order to avoid any copyright problems, I've had to heavily edit the audio to remove it. As a result, the audio quality of this video has suffered somewhat. Sorry about that. Anyway, here's Ray.
This is a scrambled egg going back into its shell. It's an illustration as to how the universe works.
Well, this is almost certainly about entropy, and yeah, this is more or less an illustration of it. Entropy is the only aspect of classical physics that is not time reversible. Suppose you see a video of 2 pool balls traveling towards each other and then colliding and changing direction, then traveling away from each other. Then you see the same footage, but in reverse. How do you know which one is actually played in the right direction? In this example of classical mechanics, time is completely reversible. If you switch the velocities and positions to be opposite of what they were, you get a perfect time-reversed version of the interaction. Entropy, though, specifically because the universe is not deterministic and not classical, is not time-reversible. Coffee doesn't tend to warm up above room temperature if you leave it on the table. Eggs don't unscramble and go back into their eggshells for the same reason.
No egg ever goes back, being scrambled, back into its shell, and so it is with the entire universe.
This is generally correct, although it's important to note that because this is fundamentally an effect in the realm of particle physics, where everything is probabilistic, not deterministic, this is a trend, not an absolute rule. Entropy can indeed fall spontaneously, it's just fantastically unlikely.
It is slowly degenerating. It's going from order to chaos.
Here's where we start to go off the rails a bit. Entropy does not actually map well into concepts of order and chaos. To illustrate, you can see this gray box. This box represents the macro state of a system. We are measuring a bulk attribute that I'll call luminance. All black would be 0, all white would be 1, and all the numbers in between are varying shades of gray. We can say that the whole box currently has a luminance of 0.5. But we could also see different zones within the box, and now we can say that the box has a luminance 0 spot, and that luminance gets higher as you go away from there. Let's set it back to all 0.5 gray. Now if we zoom in on this box, we can see that it's actually made of pixels which are either white or black. I have set it to be a checkerboard pattern, and this is considered highly ordered by most people's account. But let's zoom back out, and instead of using a checkerboard pattern, I use 50% randomly black and 50% randomly white. In this case, we still tend to get a box that's completely 0.5 gray. That is to say, it's the same macro state. The color of each box in the system, if recorded at any given moment, would be the microstate. As you can see, a single macrostate can be represented by numerous microstates. Entropy is a measure of how many microstates will yield the observed macrostate. And this is fundamentally a statistical thing. But notice that this means that the checkerboard pattern might seem very ordered, but it actually results in a highly entropic macrostate, because many other microstates yield the same macrostate. And on the other hand, the dark spot with a gradual brightening is a lower entropy state, because far fewer microstates can result in this macrostate. So is a checkerboard disordered and chaotic? I would argue not. But it can also be highly entropic. You can see that entropy does not map well onto human ideas of order and chaos.
We can see that everywhere. But listen closely as this speaker slips in the words general tendency.
It is a general tendency. Nothing other than statistics prevents entropy from decreasing. But even beyond that, it is trivially easy to produce local drops in entropy. Coffee will cool down to room temperature if you leave it on the table, but if you put that lukewarm coffee over a Bunsen burner, it will heat back up to above room temperature. You have decreased the entropy of the coffee relative to the room. Now granted, you had to expend energy in the form of chemical energy stored in the fuel for the burner, meaning that globally, entropy has decreased. But that's the point. It's a local decrease in entropy in the coffee. Similarly, with the egg, in order to form the egg in the first place, a hen has to expend chemical energy in the form of breaking apart ATP to gather amino acids, lipids, sugars, and mineral from all over her body to concentrate them in her reproductive tract and form an egg. The entropy of the egg decreases as this happens at the cost of a higher entropy in the hen during the process. Even something as simple as the Earth warming up where you are in the sunlight of the day is a decrease in the entropy of the local area compared to the universe as a whole. And when the Earth cools during the night, that's an increase in that entropy as your section of the planet gets closer to thermodynamic equilibrium with the universe as a whole.
Separated, and now they're going to be poured back into the egg. And we all know in our heart of hearts that this is not the way the universe works.
That's true.
And we know in our heart of hearts that the universe does not travel from mush to complexity. In fact, this gut instinct is reflected in one of the most fundamental laws of physics, the second law of thermodynamics, or the law of entropy.
Yep, one of the oldest criticisms of evolution in creationist discourse. Despite the fact that both Creation Ministries International and Answers in Genesis, two of the biggest creationist organizations, are skeptical of the argument and recommend against using it. Although they tend to be most skeptical of the idea that the second law of thermodynamics only came into effect after the fall of man, which would mean that things as simple as digestion, walking, and breathing wouldn't really work until Adam sinned, which would be a weird take.
What that says basically is that the general tendency of the universe
Yep, being based on non-deterministic processes, anything about entropy is going to be fundamentally statistical, not strictly deterministic. This is just true. And of course, because local entropy can decrease in trivially easy to demonstrate ways, you can't look at any system within the universe and universally predict that the entropy in that system will increase. Many systems observably and obviously decrease in entropy all the time.
Is to move from order and structure to lack of order, lack of structure, in fact to mush.
And that's where Ray cuts him off, because he was about to go on and describe how in local cases this tendency can be overcome.
It's not a general tendency. It's an unbending law.
Okay, here's an unbending law. Ohm's law. Current is proportional to the voltage divided by the resistance in a circuit. Okay, cool. I have an AC motor made with copper windings in the phases of the stator. And for the sake of ease, we'll say that each winding has 100 meters of copper wire, just to keep the math easy. Which means that each winding has a resistance of 177 microohms. So when I turn on the motor via a 120 volt AC 3-phase power supply, I should have an operating current of 678 kiloamps. Oh man, that's a problem, because basically every circuit breaker in my house has a max rating of about 20 amps of continuous current. I guess it's impossible to run AC motors, except that, my air conditioning is exactly that, an AC electrical motor. How can my air conditioner run without tripping the circuit breaker it's tied to? Oh, that's right, it's because Ohm's law doesn't take into account all the possible variables, like a local moving magnetic field, changing voltage, hysteresis loss, etc. meaning that a naive application of Ohm's law to electrical motors will cause unrealistic results. The same is true of the second law of thermodynamics. It's true within its context. But if you apply it naively or in contexts where it does not apply, then you will get unrealistic results. The creationist use of the law requires them to misuse the law in this way. Also, before anyone comes in pushing back their glasses to tell me that my house would have to be rewired to actually get me a 3-phase 120-volt AC power to run such a motor, yes, I know that. It's just an illustrative example. And besides, if I really needed to, I could do such a rewire. It's not that hard to figure out which phase is on a given hotline in the house.
Everything is turning to disorder.
No.
It's becoming dust, everything, without exception.
No, it's not, except perhaps on the timescale of quadrillions of years. But I don't operate on those timescales, and I suspect neither does Ray.
And yet, look around us. What we see around us is staggering complexity.
Which I don't like as a contrast to entropy, because, again, complexity doesn't map well onto entropy, but okay.
So here's a great puzzle. In a universe ruled by the second law of thermodynamics, how is it possible to generate the sort of complexity I've described?
The answer is that it's not possible. It never happens.
If that were true, then eggs couldn't exist. Eggs exist. Therefore, it does happen. If that were true, hot coffee couldn't be made. I made hot coffee this morning. Therefore, it's not true. If that were true, snowflakes couldn't form. Snowflakes form. Therefore, it does happen.
But listen to his response.
Okay.
Well, the answer seems to be the universe can create complexity, but with great difficulty.
Yeah, it's not easy for a hen to make an egg. It requires a lot of energy and nutrients.
In pockets, there appear what my colleague Fred Spear calls Goldilocks conditions. Not too hot, not too cold, just right for the creation of complexity.
This is a perfect analogy. He cites a fairy tale.
No, he doesn't. He uses a fairy tale as an analogy. Those are very different. Citing a fairy tale would be appealing to the fairy tale as evidence, which is exactly not what's happening here. Instead, he's using the fairy tale as a point of common reference to easily convey the concept that for entropy to decrease locally in the long term, conditions that are fairly narrow must be met. Ray's point here is as dumb as saying that because the king in the parable of the wedding banquet in the Gospels is fictional, therefore so is Jesus.
He creates pockets where no pockets exist.
I happen to both live in such a pocket and be such a pocket, as does and is Ray. I didn't expect him to imply that he doesn't exist, but then again, what can I expect from Mr. Banana?
Behold the atheist's nightmare.
Again, he's addressing the fact that evolution flies in the face of this unbending law.
No, he's explaining why it doesn't, by explaining that the law, like all laws, has conditions that must be met for it to strictly apply.
That everything gets worse. Everything runs down. Nothing improves.
Weird then how I can make hot coffee and an omelet for my breakfast anytime I want.
But evolution is supposed to be an exception.
One of countless millions of such examples that occur on Earth every day.
With it, things get better. They improve.
Nope, science isn't about judgment calls. There's no better or worse in evolution. Humans aren't better than bacteria, earthworms, or chimpanzees. They're different. If you as a human prefer humans over those organisms, I won't tell you that you're wrong, but that's not evolution talking. That's your judgment talking. Evolution is a force that creates biodiversity and causes organisms to adapt to their environment. If that makes an animal become a technological society that can change the whole planet's climate, then okay, that's evolution. If it takes another animal and reduces it to a handful of cells that are so simplified that they don't even have mitochondria, then okay, that's also evolution. Is one of those better than the other? I mean, I personally think so, but that's just me. Evolution doesn't care.
That's the dilemma. So he uses the childish fairy tale, Goldilocks and the Three Bears, to suspend entropy so that he can fit in his fantasy.
First, with his accent, it sounds like he said Goldilocks and the Three Beers. And that sounds like a more fun story. Anyway, no, he's not using the story to hand-wave away entropy. He's just using it so people remember that the important thing is that for entropy to decrease locally, conditions have to be just right. I'm not sure if Ray is too stupid to understand this, or if he's deliberately misleading. Given that he's well known to dishonestly edit people he interviews, I lean towards the latter, but I can't say with any great confidence which it is in this case.
Listen to Cornell University address the same dilemma.
Unfortunately, this article is no longer on the web, but let's just see what it says on screen. Quote, "This idea has been put forward by many people to try to prove that evolution is impossible. However, it is based on a flawed understanding of the second law of thermodynamics, and in fact the theory of evolution does not contradict any known law of physics. The second law of thermodynamics simply says that the entropy of a closed system will tend to increase with time. Entropy is a technical term with a precise physical definition." End quote. And that's all we can read. But what's all this about a closed system? Oh right, it's pointing out that the second law actually doesn't apply to all systems. Oops. And it turns out that life forms are open systems, so they don't have to obey the second law. Also, I want to point out that technically the second law applies to isolated, not closed systems. Isolated systems are those in which neither matter nor energy may enter. Closed systems are those in which energy, but not matter, may enter, and open systems may have matter or energy enter. It's common to confuse closed and isolated systems, but they are different. For example, if you take as your system a boiler tank and the water and steam in it, as well as attached pipes, that system is closed, but not isolated. If you heat the boiler tank from below with a fire, that is not part of the system. That system does not need to follow the law of entropy, even though it is closed.
Someone asked the question. I probably won't get an answer to this one, but entropy says that the universe is breaking down. Evolution says the universe is getting better. Please explain this.
The first thing to note is that the theory of evolution has nothing to say about the universe as a whole, and once again this person is making the mistake of applying better and worse to scientific concepts. When someone says evolution without qualifier and not specifically in a particular context which has already been established to not be biological, the meaning that is conveyed to most science-literate people is that of biological evolution. Biological evolution has nothing to do with the age of the universe, the formation of stars, the formation of planets, the Big Bang, etc.
The astronomer points to a poker game. The universe dealt us a lucky hand. The porridge was just right.
I mean, yeah, to some extent. Although, since we don't really know how common life is in the universe, we can't really say. Maybe this is the only planet with life. Maybe it's not. I tend to think it's probably not, but I can't say that for certain.
Back to the magical fairy tale.
The author didn't even mention Goldilocks. Does Ray not know that poker isn't a fairy tale? It's a real game? Or is he just confusing the previous speaker with this author? What kind of dumb is he doing? Let me know in the comments.
And slightly more complex things appear. And where you have slightly more complex things, you can get slightly more complex things. And in this way, complexity builds, stage by stage.
Do you think Ray will have more for us than nuh-uh to counter this?
Each stage is magical.
Ah, I see now why Ray chose this talk. It's because this guy is trying to put some whimsy into the talk to keep his listeners' attention. But in doing so, it also gave fodder for Ray's infamous dishonest editing. This is why I wish people would consider what creationists will cherry-pick when they say things about science. But on the other hand, I recognize just how obscure and irrelevant to actual science creationists are, so I get why so few people bother to consider how they'll lie about science via quote mines.
We, as extremely complex creatures, desperately need to know this story of how the universe creates complexity despite the second law.
His answer is to do what we'd encourage children to do with fairy tales, to use their imagination.
I really don't understand this denigration of imagination. Imagination is used all the time about things that are very real. Let me demonstrate. Think about a tiger. It's probably orange, with a white belly and black stripes. It has whiskers, claws, a tail, etc. You are probably currently imagining a tiger. Does that make tigers fake? No, of course not. Many of you have almost certainly seen a tiger in a zoo. The fact that children have particularly active imaginations no more means that imagination is for children than does the fact that teenagers have particularly big appetites mean that food is only for adolescents. Imagination is what we call it when humans think about things that are not currently providing them sensory input. In order to think about something without imagining it in some capacity, it has to be physically present for you, so that your senses perceive it. That means that even if God is real, virtually everyone who ever thinks about God is of necessity using their imagination. Ray included. If Ray wants to say that imagination is bad, he better stop thinking about God until God physically shows up. I, for one, recommend that he hold his breath until the parousia.
Imagine the darkest, emptiest thing you can, and cube it a gazillion times, and that's where we are. And then, suddenly, bam! A universe appears, an entire universe.
There was nothing, then, bam! The entire universe appears. without a fairy godmother. It just happened.
Well, I guess Ray thinks God is as plausible as a fairy godmother. Does that mean that Ray believes in fairy godmothers? Seriously, Ray believes in creation ex nihilo. In essence, there was nothing, then bam, God created the universe. Why he's mocking the idea he himself accepts is beyond me.
A miracle took place. Nothing created everything.
I see. Miracles for me, but not for thee, is his modus operandi.
Within the first second, energy itself shatters into distinct forces, including electromagnetism and gravity.
Maybe, but we don't currently have any theory that could unify gravity with the other three forces. Maybe we won't. I'm rather sympathetic to the idea that gravity may not even be a force in the same way as the strong, weak, and electromagnetic forces are. Then again, I'm not a physicist.
And energy does something else quite magical. What are the Goldilocks conditions? Well, first, you need energy. Now, where do you find such Goldilocks conditions?
Where do you find Goldilocks conditions? Nowhere.
Interesting assertion, but since pretty much all possible energy levels except the absolute highest are known to exist somewhere in the universe, then there must also be places where the energy levels are conducive to local drops in entropy via biological processes. In fact, you don't have to look very far. Chances are that unless you're a general AI watching this in the far future waiting for your next synchronization update from Omnius, you're not just in such a location, you are such a location.
They're non-existent. There's no pocket, no lucky card, and no Goldilocks.
What an odd thing to say while physically existing in and as such a place. Also, do you think Ray knows that nuh-uh isn't actually an argument?
Everything is corrupting. Nothing is getting better.
Again, if that were true, then new organisms couldn't be born. Ray actually accepts local drops in entropy. He has to, or he'd have to deny basic things like metabolism and reproduction. Heck, even things like tornadoes and hurricanes use energy gradients to organize matter, and their existence is a local drop in entropy at the cost of higher overall entropy in the atmosphere. This doesn't even require life. Random bits of floating nitrogen will spontaneously develop order in the right conditions. Or will Ray simply deny the existence of storms? Of course, what he'd probably do is just deny that they are in fact examples of order naturally arising from disorder in the form of local low entropy systems that form by increasing overall entropy. I doubt he could articulate a reason for this, though, except that it makes him wrong. This man has never, it seems, formed a logical thought in his life.
Science tells us that, and it's evident everywhere we look.
Nope, science tells us the exact opposite, and the opposite is evident just in the existence of Ray Comfort himself. The reason you can tell that science tells you the exact opposite is that science accepts things like evolution and the formation of cyclones. If science rejected the possibility of local order and localized drops in entropy, then science would have to reject most of meteorology, most of astrophysics, and basically all of biology. You might notice that rather than those things being rejected by science, they are instead all fields of science. Ray doesn't have to like those things, and he can contend that they're all wrong, but saying that they're not part of science is just a lie.
And our early Earth was almost perfect. But of course, life is more than just exotic chemistry.
I would tend to agree. Although if you look at it from a reductionist perspective, it is in fact just a bunch of fancy chemistry. I'm not much of a reductionist, though.
Now, information comes out of nowhere. Coherent, complex information.
Maybe the next thing that guy said was about information, but if so, that was cut out. Near as I can tell, this is just Ray introducing a new word into the discussion. Of course, creationists never really define information in a way that would allow us to assess any of their claims about it. Let's see if Ray is an exception to that.
Actual instructions on how to create life.
Is he talking about DNA? I can't even tell. He probably is.
You'll be familiar with the double helix of DNA. Each rung contains information.
Ah, there it is. Hey, pro tip to creationists out there. If you want to respond to what someone is saying, wait until they say it to respond. Otherwise, it's very confusing.
So DNA contains information about how to make living organisms.
By way of analogy, I suppose, but remember, DNA is just a chemical, or perhaps a class of chemicals if we need chemical to mean only one single chemical formula. It interacts with other chemicals, and as a result, emergent phenomena occur, such as growth and reproduction. A similar thing can be seen in an ant colony. There are no instructions in an ant colony, and no leader, nor is anyone outside the colony orchestrating their behavior normally. Instead, ants follow basic simple instincts like, if you smell this chemical, go towards it. If you have food that you're carrying, make sure to deposit this chemical. If you smell this chemical, start fighting. If you smell too much of this other chemical, start digging, etc. No single ant can even conceive of the group behavior of the colony, let alone control it. Indeed, even if you were to know every single such rule, it would be hard to predict how those rules would cause a group of thousands of beings following those rules to act in aggregate. Yet with all these simple rules, themselves all just chemically governed in a simple stimulus response ant brain, we get complex behavior, like foraging, fighting larger animals raid boss style, what amounts to tiny wars between colonies, and the digging of vast and complex nests underground, and even things like ants forming their bodies into parts of ladders and rafts. None of this is found in the form of any instruction manual. It emerges from the simple rules that ants follow. DNA is the same way. It doesn't contain a blueprint for a living organism. It contains genes and regulatory sequences, and cells simply do things like divide, die, and turn on or off genes when they receive certain chemical signals. In fact, embryological experiments often involve artificially introducing more of some chemical or blocking some chemical, which results in the embryo growing differently. No one has to go in and change blueprints because fundamentally comparing DNA to the information you might find at a municipal planning office is misleading.
So the information spreads. Notice that information has become part of our story.
Once again, I can see why Ray likes this talk. It's easy to quote mine and intentionally misunderstand.
Scientists call DNA the book of life.
Do they? I haven't seen them do that, but whatever. Scientists can name things whatever they want. They sometimes call the Higgs boson the God particle. I don't think that means that physicists think God is a boson that gives some subatomic particles mass.
No book of information ever created itself. Ever.
Okay, well, DNA isn't literally a book of information. That's this thing called an analogy. So who cares? In John 7:9, Jesus calls himself a door. Is Jesus made of wood? Does he have a handle or a knob? Can you lock him with a key? Or maybe do you think that humans are allowed to be non-literal, including Jesus, and maybe Ray should pull his head out of his...
It's scientifically impossible without the realm of possibility.
Saying something is impossible is quite the claim, and I'd love to see a citation for that.
Now here's the scary part. This childish stupidity is enthusiastically applauded by people who don't seem to have the ability to think.
Well, now I need a new irony meter because mine just broke.
If you think that was foolish,
I do not.
we're about to look at something just as crazy.
So not crazy at all, but probably easy to misrepresent. Oh good.
The evolution of the eye.
Okay, next we get a lot of Richard Dawkins just going through the explanation of the evolution of the eye as given by Darwin in The Origin of Species. The clips are quite extensive, and I have more or less nothing to add, so I'll let you know what happens before Ray cuts back in, and then I'll respond to Ray. Basically, it starts with pointing out that modern eyes are quite complex, and again repeats various times that Dawkins has said the word imagine because Ray is a moron. Right before Ray cuts in, Dawkins is explaining the step from a cup-shaped eye to a pinhole eye, and asks his assistant Byron to put a cover over the cup-shaped apparatus he's using for demonstrative purposes. The cover has a small hole so that he can illustrate that a pinhole eye can resolve more detail than a cup-shaped depression with light-sensitive cells.
I've got a question for you, Professor. Why are you having Bryson help you to put together your contraption?
I'm not Dawkins, but I'll answer anyway. It's because that way, Dawkins can concentrate on the presentation and keep a smoother flow for the audience. My subscribers are also not Dawkins, so if you want to be cool and not some old man who wrote some good books, some bad books, and then disgraced himself by defending clerical child predators and being a bigot on the internet, why not subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications? While you're at it, a like would be nice, as it's one of the few ways that YouTube actually notices that I make content and shows it to people.
You don't need his help. Let it make itself, from nothing.
Well, let's just assume that the Big Bang really is the origin of energy, and that energy came from nothing. I don't think that's the case, but sure. What Ray is watching is that happening, because guess where all the matter making up both Bryson and the apparatus came from? That's right, the Big Bang. Bryson is the Big Bang causing the apparatus to be made out of nothing. But further, this apparatus isn't a living population of organisms that could evolve.
The truth is, you'd never wait for nothing to make itself into a designed structure.
Well, assuming that eyes are designed in order to demonstrate that they're designed is begging the question. That is, using the conclusion one is arguing for as a premise in the argument for the conclusion.
Because you know it could never happen. Not in a million years.
Technically,
That's true.
but the question when it comes to evolution isn't how can design structures come into being without a designer, but are these things designed in the first place? The firm conclusion of science is that no, they are not, at least not in a teleological sense. If you want to talk about them in design terms by way of analogy, that's okay, as long as you remember that that's an analogy. But Ray here thinks that they were designed in the sense of having a designer, so he doesn't get to assume that's true in order to argue that they were designed.
And yet you're wanting your hearers to believe that inanimate life
What the f*** is inanimate life. Inanimate and life are basically opposites. This is like saying pointy circle.
Rocks and mountains
Well, those aren't life at all, but okay.
all made themselves.
If you want to watch rocks and mountains being made without any outside intelligent designer making them, you can just go to Hawaii. It happens there all the time. And further, mountains like the Himalayas are still forming and being pushed up by the impersonal and non-divine forces of plate tectonics. Ray is just denying readily observable reality here. Does Ray actually think that every rock is made by a miracle of God? Are volcanoes themselves miracles?
And here, you want them to believe that biological life, which is infinitely more complex, made itself from nothing.
No. First, I don't accept that the Big Bang was the spontaneous origin of energy ex nihilo. Although I don't disbelieve that. I'm agnostic on the matter. Second, the evolution of the eye isn't something that happened starting with the formation of the first life. That's something that happened long after that. Nothing about what Dawkins was talking about was about the origin of life. His demonstration was about how eye evolution would be unchanged if life formed naturally, or if God made it as a miracle. Or if aliens place it here, or whatever. The origin of life and the evolution of that life after its origin are not the same thing. Just like how a car crashed into a tree, and where and how the car was manufactured are not the same question. Third, life doesn't just come spilling out of the Big Bang under anyone's conception. So even if the Big Bang is the origin of energy ex nihilo, describing life as coming from nothing in the immediate sense is a lie. It's like saying that your computer comes from sand and trees. I mean, sure, if you go back far enough, that's true. But when people talk about where they got, say, their motherboard and their graphics card, they're more likely to talk about companies that made those components. Generally, when people ask where something came from, they want the proximate origin. If someone asks where I got this bread I'm eating, I'm going to say the store. I'm probably not going to say I got it from the store, which got it from a distributor, which got it from a bakery, which combined water from a municipal water supply with flour ground from wheat grown in Iowa, and then salt harvested from the Pacific Ocean, and the water came from, etc., etc. And further, even if the wheat was from Kansas, the water from hydrolysis in a water factory, and the salt from the Himalayan evaporite deposits, that doesn't change the from the store answer. After this, Dawkins goes on to describe how the narrower the pinhole is, the sharper the image, and how a lens can concentrate light like a pinhole, but can gather more light, making the image brighter, and notes that no step in the evolution of the eye is particularly complex, and that each step is advantageous over the previous steps in many environments. As a result of this, he points out that despite appearances to the contrary, that the eye is trivially easy for evolution to produce, and that partial eyes are better than no eyes, and that more of an eye is better than less of an eye. Of course, there's also dishonest editing, but whatever. Also, the editing sucks. The editor left a lot of black frames in between cuts.
Professor Dawkins, you've spent your life denying the existence of God.
Yes, he has, but since that's not a claim about science, I don't care.
And in doing so, you and your friends have turned many away from the gospel. You have convinced them that they are the results of a random explosion, that they're nothing but talking primates.
Humans are talking primates in the same way that they're talking vertebrates or talking mammals. After this, we transition to some man in the street style interview where Ray interviews people who are largely not studying evolution, cosmology, or the origin of life, and tries to play gotcha games with them. I won't include all of it, as a lot of it is just preaching, but some of it is interesting.
I do believe in evolution.
Now, why is that?
Well, over millions of years, to me it makes sense that people change, like, physically and biologically over time, over, like, very long periods of time.
And it is observably true that people and other organisms do change over time as a result of changing allele frequencies. In fact, most creationists do not contest this fact.
18 years ago, you're just a little baby. You have changed physically, and it didn't take millions of years. So what's the difference between what you're telling me about evolution and the physical change that we have now? I mean, caterpillars turn into butterflies in a matter of weeks. Tadpoles turn into frogs in a matter of weeks. What's the difference between Darwinian evolution and what we see in natural life?
The difference is that humans growing up, caterpillars becoming butterflies, and tadpoles becoming frogs are all examples of ontogeny, that is, the growth of an individual. This is controlled by the genetics of that single individual, and those genetics do not change appreciably during the organism's ontogeny. Evolution is a change in the allele frequencies in a population of multiple organisms across generations, resulting in changes at any point in the ontogenetic development of individual members of that population. It's a pretty basic difference, and I find it hard to believe that Ray is actually honestly confused about this. I think this is him being a dishonest piece of shit, and asking a trick question of some unsuspecting kid who doesn't really know enough about the topic to engage with a dishonest critic of evolution.
So, Braden, do you believe in evolution?
Yes.
I'm convinced evolution is a fact.
Why?
Overwhelming scientific evidence.
Good answer.
Think of any?
The twin-nested hierarchy, transitional fossils, faunal succession, observed evolution in the wild and in the lab, and endogenous retroviruses.
Namely Darwin and mostly what they teach you in schools.
Which basically encompasses what I said, and there's no immediate response from Ray.
Now, when evolution first started, how did the eyes evolve? What caused them to begin evolving?
Well, let's start with opsins. They are a class of proteins that react to light, but they also, being chemical, react to chemistry. They have different homologs that are used for chemical signaling. This allows an organism to react to light levels, and if that is advantageous to the organism's reproductive output, that will cause an eye to start evolving. But I should note that this is not something that happened when evolution first started, but billions of years later.
The first eye evolved.
The eye is very intricate. It's got 137 million light-sensitive cells.
Yeah, now it does, but if an organism has one such cell, it can react to light, whereas one with no such cells can't. That's all it takes. Eyes didn't come into existence as complex camera eyes in a single step. That's saltation, not evolution as it is understood in science.
Focusing muscles move an estimated 100,000 times a day. Unspeakably complex.
Complexity is a prediction of evolution. Pointing it out does nothing to make evolution less likely.
How did the first eye evolve? What happened? What caused it?
I actually don't have an answer to that.
You know, Ray could ask people who do know, but we know when he does, he just dishonestly edits them anyway. It's like that whole ninth commandment thing was just a goof.
Now, tell me about this eye. It was just cells and then it decided it wanted to see?
No, there was no volition. Some chemicals change when certain wavelengths of light hit them. Cells can react to chemical changes. That's it. That's all it takes to start the evolution of the first eye.
How long did this take?
A few 100,000 years at the most.
Over millions of years, probably.
So was it an animal or was it just an eye lying there, sort of a pre-eye?
I can't believe I have to say this, but animal organs evolve in animal populations. So every time those eyes evolved, they did so as part of an already existing animal lineage as part of the bodies of those animals. This is also true for hearts, muscles, lungs, gills, gonads, livers, whatever.
Well, I would think that a cell, right, came together to form more cells, and that came a little microorganism, right? Then that had incentive to live, so it developed things to help it live over millions and millions of years.
Well, I'd contest the incentive part, and this doesn't really have much to do with the eye, but he's not wrong.
Can it see yet?
No.
How did it eat?
By absorbing every little other things.
Have a brain?
No.
How did it think?
It didn't, and the vast majority of organisms alive today also have no brain, including many animals. Cnidarians, porphyrins, and ctenophores are all animals that are doing pretty well on the whole today, and have no brains at all. Getting closer to humans, echinoderms also lack a brain as adults, and even closer to humans, tunicates also lack brains as adults. Even then, many animals with a brain, like ants, probably aren't really thinking in any way that Ray would recognize.
I think it did whatever it did, you know?
Yep, like the vast majority of organisms around today. Do you think that Ray knows that single-celled organisms are still around and that they outnumber multicellular organisms by orders of magnitude?
Brain evolve over years along with the eye that's evolving?
Well, in many cases, yes, they did evolve along with a brain, but not in all cases. Many jellyfish of the phylum Cnidaria have eyes, but no brain.
I wouldn't think the brain evolved until it actually evolved over millions of years, kind of into this animal. Well, it takes like eons at this point now.
I'm not super confident I know what that guy means there, but that's why these men on the street interviews are dumb. For most people, just accepting the scientific consensus is fine for most topics, including evolution. Only weirdos like me tend to dive deeply into such things.
Can it see yet?
Probably not.
Because you need the whole eye to be fully evolved to see, don't you? Half an eye doesn't really work.
Except it does, and we know because we have animals with every stage of the evolution of eyes alive and doing just fine today. Planarians vary from having just photosensitive patches to cup-shaped eyes. Nautiluses have pinhole eyes without lenses. There are many other examples, but the bare fact that these stages on the path to a vertebrate-style camera eye still exist and are used successfully by animals today is conclusive evidence that half an eye is indeed useful.
Right, in the sense that maybe...
Could it smell the food?
Yes, because chemoreception is about as basic a function as life can possibly have. The ability to detect chemical gradients long predates sight of any kind. Now, it wasn't detecting and sensing food in the way that Ray smells a pot roast cooking in the oven, but fundamentally, smell is just chemoreception, and that goes back about as far as life itself. Life is a chemical system, and therefore it could always interact with chemistry, even from before it could reasonably be called life.
Maybe it just senses it, like,
Where did the food come from?
You notice how Ray likes to cut this guy off every time he seems to actually have an answer? That's because Ray isn't actually interested in a dialogue about evolution. He's just using it in hopes to stump this guy so he feels inferior to Ray, and so Ray has a chance to offer him a chance to be superior like Ray by converting to Ray's religion. It's underhanded and disgusting. Also, the earliest life was chemosynthetic, and food existed in its environment because metabolism precedes life. It most likely was in the form of sulfur compounds near volcanic vents under the ocean, a way of life that persists to this day around deep-sea vents. Indeed, complex ecosystems by such vents have chemosynthetic prokaryotes as the basis for their food webs.
Food come from?
Hey, where does answer go? Ray just cut the clip. I wonder if he actually had a plausible answer after thinking about it. Based on what he said so far, it seems like it. As it seems like this guy is actually pretty well informed on evolution, but just isn't used to being asked rapid-fire questions about it by some asshole on the street.
When did the eye begin to see?
Well before any organ existed that could even reasonably be called an eye, because as long as light-sensitive opsins are near the surface of an animal, it can detect light.
Probably millions of years later.
And then we just cut to no argument from Ray. And since there is an obviously dishonest edit before he was asked this question, I don't even know what the context of later means. Maybe he means millions of years after life formed, in which case, yes.
No, it was just there on top of an antenna.
See, this guy, while very wrong, is, unlike Ray, near as I know, not going around encouraging people to reject science all while portraying himself as a big brain who can overturn more or less all we know about the world. So when he gets evolution wrong, I don't really mind. It's fine to be ignorant about evolution, unless, of course, you're trying to go around and spread your ignorance. Most people who don't know much about evolution aren't trying to make sure others never learn about it.
I don't understand evolution, and I have to protect my kids from understanding it.
As time went on, we needed eyes to see.
2 eyes or 1?
That depends on the lineage, but in most cases it was 2 or more. Cnidarians tend to have one at the end of each feeding appendage. Clams tend to have them studded around the edges of their shells. Most arthropods have several, often including a centerline eye. All the organisms I know of that have eyes also have at least one axis of symmetry, meaning that eyes should occur either along the axis, which can result in centerline eyes in bilaterians, or in radially symmetrical organisms, it will be multiple eyes, or they can occur in multiples between or across axes of symmetry, as occurs in human eyes. Because symmetry is so ubiquitous across basically all animals except porphyrins, we should expect most lineages with eyes to have multiple eyes, but not necessarily 2.
2?
2 eyes? I'm guessing, maybe 1 eye.
Does it matter? If you have at least one axis of symmetry, it's not more difficult to evolve things in multiple sets than to evolve one thing. That's kind of the point of symmetry.
1 works fine. Why would it have 1 and then decide it needed 2?
Symmetry.
Probably depth perception.
That's something that would have to come up much later. That being said, a wider field of view is an obvious advantage of having multiple eyes.
I think it was more like it was like a sensor organ or something.
Where did that come from?
I don't even know what question he's asking. Did Ray have this edited by a pathologically dishonest toddler or something? This is worse editing than even I do.
From a bunch of cells thinking, this sensory organ is pretty cool. Might want to pass that down.
Where did they come from?
This is just Ray acting like a toddler who keeps asking why until his parents just stop answering. Of course, if you want to dig deep enough, you'll always get to the point where the person you're talking to doesn't know. When that happens, it is neither a reason to insert God into science, nor is it a reason to pretend that what they do know isn't true.
Wouldn't know. That's a big mystery, huh?
We were fish?
No, we are fish. Specifically, we are Osteichthyan, Ripidistan, Sarcopterygian, Stegocephalian fish.
I think so. I think we came from the sea.
Life depends on water, giving us good chemical reason to think life originated in water. Additionally, all the earliest fossils until well after the Cambrian are of aquatic life. Combined, these two facts make it all but certain that life indeed originated in the ocean, and only later colonized land.
And did we have lungs or gills under the water?
Both. Lungs predate the split between ray fin fish and lobe fin fish, and evolved as an outgrowth of the digestive tract. In most aquatic fish, they then went on to become lipid or gas-filled swim bladders, rather than breathing organs. But in some fish, especially ripidistine fish, like you and me, and the lungfish of South America and Africa, they retain their respiratory function. You see, air actually has a lot of easily available oxygen, and you can sustain a higher metabolic rate with more oxygen, which means that even with gills, there is a good reason to have access to airborne oxygen. Further, bodies of water can more easily be depleted of oxygen than can air, meaning that even today we see fish without lungs gulp air in low oxygen bodies of water, because oxygen can be absorbed from the air even through the digestive system. Of course, that's not as efficient as lungs, which evolved specifically for that purpose, but it shows why lungs are so closely tied to the digestive tract, something that is actually not ideal, as it is why choking is a thing. This link really only makes sense in light of evolution.
Oh no, like you would get lungs later on.
Gills did evolve first, but since the question was, did we have lungs while in the water, and I take it that by we, he means our ancestors, the question is definitely yes.
Have you heard of entropy?
What a bizarre way to start a conversation.
I have not.
Have you heard of the second law of thermodynamics?
I have not.
Why would that even be in here? Again, Ray needs to get someone besides an evil toddler to edit his videos.
The universe tends itself towards chaos.
Ah, good. Someone who will give an intuitive but incorrect definition so that Ray can pounce on it with his own misunderstanding of both evolution and entropy. Goody.
Happens everywhere.
No.
Only in isolated systems.
In 1 trillion years, all these rocks here will be turned to dust. We'll be turned to dust. The dog will be turned to dust. The flowers, the birds, the trees, even the mountains and the planets will be turned to dust. Everything is corrupting.
Weird way to phrase it, but yeah, nothing is forever. But the fact that nothing lasts forever doesn't negate its existence now, nor does it on its own mean that things that exist now must have come into being miraculously.
Does that make sense?
I think it definitely makes sense.
You can see it everywhere.
Exactly.
Except with evolution. Evolution does the exact opposite.
Okay, look, he's just repeating himself from the beginning now, so that's where we'll leave it. There's only a few more minutes of him making scientific claims, and they're just ones he's already done, and the rest of it is just Ray preaching. I'm going to assume you know the basic message of Protestant Christianity, and if you believe that Christ died for your sins and rose again on the third day to prove it, I guess, I'm not really clear on what Protestants think the point of the resurrection is, then feel free to say a sinner's prayer if you want. If instead you want to join up with some other branch of Christianity, they'll probably want you to take classes. I hear it can take up to a year to go through the classes for groups like the Roman Catholics or the Eastern Orthodox. If that doesn't interest you, then also cool. I'm not here to convert people to or away from Christianity, just to get them to stop being science deniers. In conclusion, I guess the best reason to not accept evolution is that if you don't know what entropy is, you might get confused, and because it's possible to pretend that eyes are a problem for evolution. That sounds like two very bad reasons, not one good reason, but I'll let you be the judge. If you enjoyed this video, please hit like and tell me what you liked in the comments. If you didn't like it, then hit dislike and let me know what the problem was. Either way, please subscribe if you haven't and turn on all notifications so that occasionally YouTube might tell you about my content if they feel like it, regardless of your wishes. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur. Hey, before you leave, I just want to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Benthoven, Philravara, Tapioca Weasel, Whispers, Denny5252, Eleron Teller, Horseflesh, Ian Chen, Kelvin Brostek Van Manen, Landon Knoll, Mabdy Babdy, Monkey They Them, Sphincter of Doom, Vollus, John Ackerman, Eta V, and Strawberry Vein. It's because of my channel members and patrons whom you're seeing on screen that this channel can stay afloat. Without you, it would all shut down. If you want to join the team, there's a link to join the channel below this video, and there's a link to join the Patreon in the description. On the Patreon, you can get a 10% discount for pledging annually, and either way, you get early access to virtually all of my scripted videos, often 3 to 5 months before they come out for the general public. Thanks for watching.